Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Build. I'm Ethan Alter from Yahoo Entertainment, senior writer with Yahoo Entertainment. I'm going to be here this morning talking with the writer, co-writer, director, and star of the new movie Breath, Simon Baker. The film opens in theaters on June 1st in New York City and expands on June 8th. Let's take a look at the trailer. It's a great 70s coming-of-age story with lots of fun surfing sequences, dramatic surfing sequences, I should say.
There's fear in all of us. I know that now. It's how you live with it that makes you who you are.
Oh! I'll surf that one day. You dare me? I dare you to dare me.
Thinking of fishing on Saturday if you want to come, mate.
Probably going to go out to the beach with Lenny.
What would you do if she put her hand in your pocket?
Why would she?
I don't know. See what you could find.
What do you reckon?
Hippies. That's what I reckon. I could tell she liked me.
What?
She was looking at me with that special look.
She wasn't looking at anything. How does it feel when it's that serious?
You boys will find out. You'll be out there thinking, am I solid or am I just ordinary? Look at me. Let's just do something different, all right?
Fear's only natural, mate. Daring to try, that's mankind for you.
You're different. You got this look, like you're expecting to lose something.
I don't know if I'm feeling it.
Come on, Pikelet, you know what's what.
You're a coward.
Show a bit of support.
What for? He's chicken.
So you got lows.
Big enough to get the boy wonder's heart started.
How big, boy wonder?
Don't want you to think I don't notice these things. Well, I think you know what I'm talking about.
Don't be dirty about that.
What are you talking about?
Oh, nothing. Just gossip.
Why do you let him go?
He needs
What about what you need? It's not about the thoughts in your head. It's about surrender. Surrender is what frees you up to be completely in the moment. To commit with your body and your soul. Not a shred of that.
being scared's half the fun. You should know that by now.
Great. And that's Breath. We're here with Simon Baker, who, again, co-wrote, directed, and stars in the movie. And it's coming in theaters June 1st in New York and expands June 8th. So, Simon, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So now, Tim Winton's book came out exactly a decade ago in 2008, and the film's coming out now. What do you remember about the first time you read the novel? What sort of what moved you about it?
I was sitting on a set in California working, and a producer that I'd worked with a few years before, Mark Johnson, who, has produced, a bunch of films, many very successful films over the years, and more recently Breaking Bad.
Right.
He sent me the book, and it was largely how I grew up. Right. And Tim Winton is probably the most celebrated living Australian author, and that book particularly, Breath, won the Miles Franklin Award, which is the highest literary award in Australia. And so I read it, and it shook me. At the time, I had two teenage sons. Mm-hmm. I still have two teenage sons, so it resonated on a lot of different levels. And he said, "Look, would you like to be involved in trying to make this into a film?" And immediately I jumped on board.
Right. I mean, I wonder, as you said, you sort of grew up in the 70s, which is the era the novel's set in. Do you remember...
Late 70s.
Let's not date you too much.
Myself
right.
a little bit of a break. Yeah. I was a little bit more of an 80s kid, really.
Fair enough.
I was born in 69, so I started surfing sort of probably 79.
Right.
78, 79.
But do you remember, as a child, seeing sort of your life reflected in Australian film and television at the time? Because when we think of 70s Australian film, it tends to be Picnic at Hanging Rock, the art house stuff, or sort of the genre things that sort of made it over here. Were there sort of films like this that you remember seeing, or is it something...
There was nothing ever really like this. There was a film that Bruce Beresford made in the I think it was sort of probably about the same time, the late 70s, called Puberty Blues, which was a seminal film. And then they made more recently a television series, like a soap opera type television series based on it in Australia. And it dealt with the idea of sexual awakening and the influence of drugs through that period of adolescence where we're most fragile and most susceptible and we're trying to figure out who the hell we are.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because essentially, people say it's a coming-of-age film. Coming of age as a notion, as a genre, is an interesting one for me because I'm nearly 50 and I'm coming of age in this period of my life. Like we constantly go through these different rites of passage. That one, that particular rite of passage is possibly one of the more salient rites of passage because, when you go through this one I'm about to go, that I'm going through now, like midlife, you reflect a lot on how potent that period of your life was,
right?
And what those moments were that helped define who you were. And you don't really know those moments when you're in them, those lines that you step across. But in hindsight, you can sort of reflect and see that decision I made that night to not go to that party where this happened and that happened and people's lives were changed. Or that moment where I said, I don't want to be part of that mob. That's not for me. Mm-hmm. I'll do my thing. And to accept that and understand that there's a boldness and a braveness in standing on your own 2 feet and being your own person.
Is there a passage in the book when you read it that made you feel, I have to direct this movie?
There was a lot. Okay. First of all, being a lifelong surfer and someone that communes with the ocean on a lot of different levels, it was the best articulated literary articulation of being a surfer and being in the water that I'd ever read, and I'd read a lot of it. So that was one aspect. And even people that didn't surf, like my mother-in-law, she loved the book too. And I don't know if any of you have read the book, but it puts you in that place, and you can kind of understand that obsessive nature of that sport, or that sort of, at that time it was a subculture. No. It's kind of more of a sport these days. It's been highly commercialized and exploited for the value of what it can make. So that aspect of it wasn't really what made me go, I want to make this into a film, because to do it on paper is one thing, but to actually be able to harness that into film is a very difficult thing. And I don't know that, I watched every narrative film that's had surfing in it, and so many of them fall short because they feel, the surfing always feels a bit sort of glossy and shiny and false, and I don't ever feel like I'm in it. And I didn't want to make a movie about surfing. I wanted to make a movie about people and identity and the drama of trying to figure out who you are in relation to your peers and your parents. That was mainly the focus of it. Surfing was really the canvas.
I mean, certainly the character you play, Sando, has this sort of desire to be. He's been surfing for a while. It sort of feels like his career at a certain point has peaked. He's sort of living in Australia, almost in exile, kind of, and then finds these two boys and tries to become sort of a guru to them, or at least that's what he's accused of becoming, and becoming this sort of above it all mentor. What did you think about his personality? Do you think he has motivations, selfish motivations, by taking them on? I mean, how did you sort of get a read on him as a person?
Well, I think the notion and the idea of guru in itself there's a narcissism to it associated with it straight away, and I think that with any of these kind of counterculture, particularly in surfing, that surfers love this sort of mythology, and I think he plays into that mythology where he eschews the limelight and is sort of somewhat reclusive, but at the same time is attached to that limelight of the past, that he was there. I think he's also a guy that's knocking on the door of a midlife crisis, and there's this sort of, he's going through his own identity shift where he's probably more aware of his masculinity. But on a bigger picture, and masculinity is an interesting concept right now, particularly, and we've heard we've heard a lot of talk about toxic masculinity, and I think it's quite a potent and salient topic to discuss at this point in the world. For a lot of reasons. And in Australia in the 70s, that archetype of masculinity was so heavily laid on and so thick, we sort of exploited it and exported it as a big part of our national identity. And growing up in that period, there was and I grew up in an area where there was sort of the ratio of men to women there was a lot more men than there were women. So there was this sort of this forced masculinity that you had that was shoved down your throat, and the idea of not living up to that expectation and was a potent and emotionally difficult thing. And really, in a lot of ways, I wanted to set up the archetype, the stereotype of that masculine ideal, and then subvert it, because I think really that's what's often been taking place. Right. And the notion of children getting to a point, sons teaching their fathers certain things, and I know through my teenage boys, there's a lot of stuff that they're teaching me to update the concept of masculinity these days. And I distinctly remember the period in my life where I had outgrown my stepfather, and I knew it. I couldn't communicate with him. He was of another time. And I think it's very, very important that we keep trying to reset and develop and grow.
Did you know specific men like Sando when you were young? Do you remember like someone?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that was a big part of taking this job on, is that I knew all of these characters. I knew them all really, really well, and I still am in touch with a lot of them and know them. So I felt very confident with and familiar with not just the characters, but this sort of story.
Right. Speaking to your comments earlier about sort of the culture of surfing, I mean, there are a lot of stereotypes associated with surfing, obviously. We sort of have our image of them frozen from things like Patrick Swayze in Point Break and things like that. Obviously, what are some of the things that you want to explode about the surfing culture in your mind? Or what do we get wrong about the surfing stereotype often?
We get so much wrong about stereotypes in general. and that's something that's sort of at the forefront of our evolution as humans right now, is that we constantly get things wrong. Stereotypes are a real problem because we're all individual and we're all unique and we all have our own thoughts. At the moment, there seems to me that the push and the energy is about understanding individuality and uniqueness in each person and accepting that, and not having to say you have to be a part of the mob, and if you're not, we're going to ostracize you. So yeah, the stereotypes of surfing, of course. I was a thoughtful, introspective kid, but also a rascal that acted out. I was interested in the arts. I was interested in reading. I still like to play football and go surfing and do sort of macho stuff. But I remember as a child, people didn't know where to categorize me because I wasn't all broad archetype masculine. I was sensitive as well. And I'd prefer to sit and talk to girls because they talked,
right.
and express things. And I like to listen, and I like to learn and develop and understand a bit more. I'm empathic. That's the nature of who I am, and I think it's probably why I became an actor and ultimately went on to become a director. So yeah, there's a lot of stereotypes.
Right. Well, you just dropped a revelation that you were a rascal at times. What's the worst prank you ever pulled, or worst bit of trouble you caused?
No, man, I'll get a... What's the statute of limitations on half of these things? I don't know. The biggest crime I committed was just being an idiot.
The movie sort of indicate. I mean, in the '90s, surfing in Australia got into the culture of the broadboys and things, which mixed violence and surfing and things like that. And the movie definitely hints at that development in the way one character in particular ends up. Watching that play out in real time, what are your memories of how surfing got sort of overtaken by that culture and that version of surfing for you?
Look, I think that particular time, sort of through the late 80s and the early 90s, there was a lot of aggression associated with the sport. But that aggression was born out of territory. It was out of fear of losing something. Yeah, we all want to belong. We all want to feel like we've got a place where we feel safe. And once we have that, the extreme and the extent that we'll go to protect it can far outweigh the whole idea of it. So we end up destroying not just it, but ourselves at the same time. So often, and you look throughout the world at often where violence comes from, and it's about protecting something. It comes from a place of fear anyway, the fear of losing something. So I fight for it, as opposed to, I don't know what the answer is. I'm not. I don't know the answer. But that's where I think a lot of that, I'd certainly know the territorial aspect of surfing was always about the fear of losing what you had, and other people invading and coming in. But I think things have changed a lot more, and I think people are becoming far more open and accepting of others and accepting of sharing a good time as opposed to hogging it. It's like the market economy or the gift economy.
Right. Like everyone should.
The market economy is full of fear. Like, don't take it away from me. I've got this. This is mine. And the gift economy is like, this is mine. And it was fantastic, and now you can have it. And it can be fantastic for you. And
right.
and that becomes that snowballs that effect. And in a lot of ways, that sort of relates to the notion of making a film in general. Like, you work so hard and you're so protective of it when you're making it, and then when you finally finish it, then you're like, then you give it away. It's no longer mine.
Right.
I'm here now to give it away to you, and to give it away to an audience, and then it becomes theirs, and it's their experience. And whether they like it or not, that is their right, because they've had their experience with it. So it's a gift.
Yeah. This is the first feature you've directed. You've directed episodes of TV Before the Mentalist and things. What's the scene in the film you're proudest of, just as a director, from a standpoint, capturing it?
Oh, what's the scene that I'm most proud of? Look, the whole thing really, and the process of filmmaking is phenomenally inclusive. So you gather a group of people, you have to manage those people, you have to inspire those people, and you have to enthuse those people with the same enthusiasm that you have, so that everyone brings the best of what they have to it under the focus of one person. So sharing the experience of making is probably the greatest experience for me for this film. So there's no particular scene. The result is the result of a lot of people's heart and souls going into one focused idea. And for me, there's an enormous amount of joy in that experience. That the film goes away, I give the film away, but that experience stays with me and will always stay with me. And that experience enriches me as a person and has fulfilled me as a person.
Right. I guess alternately, was there a scene that you were afraed of doing?
Every one of them.
Everyone.
No, all the stuff on the water is because I've surfed all my life, and I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and I wanted it to be incredibly authentic. So I cast these two leads that were non-actors. They were surfers. It took a year to cast them, so we had to sort of teach them and train them up to act. So we shot all the stuff in the water for real. We were relying on Mother Nature to open up her arms and embrace us and be kind, and we were incredibly lucky, and she was. So she gave us the opportunity, and they're obviously moments that could have gone horribly wrong, but we got incredibly lucky, and Mother Nature was incredibly nurturing towards us.
Well, you mentioned earlier a lot of narrative surfing films just don't get the sport right. So what's the piece of advice you'd suggest to other directors going forward, having done one yourself now? What's something that you learned that you said, okay, this is how you should use?
Working on the water it's a very different animal. Like right here, we're in a controlled environment where we can manhandle the environment to suit our needs. When you're working on the water, you can't be that arrogant. You can't control the environment. You have to be passive, and you have to dance with it. You let it lead, and you follow it. So there's humility in the way you approach it, and that's a philosophical approach to how you work. And with that, you have to rely on happy accidents and to be fluid and spontaneous. Words of advice? I don't know. Don't let fear get in the way of what you want to do. Just let it encourage you and motivate you.
Okay. I've got to ask really quickly, what's your worst wipeout story for surfing?
Oh, shit. I have a fused spine, so that didn't happen on the movie. But there's a couple that don't end up in the film that were pretty heavy. But no, worst wipeouts, I don't know. A couple of wave hold downs, those sort of things. Sometimes like the leg rope gets caught around your neck or something and pulls.
Oh, man.
And you think you're being garroted while you're underwater, and you kind of open your eye, or you swim like crazy and your eyes are closed and you swim like crazy, and then you hit the bottom when you think you've been swimming to the top. And you've got no oxygen left in your lungs. All of those things they all sound terrifying, but they're not so bad. It's like, it's surrender. You just kind of got to give over to it.
Right. Take it in the moment and just don't fight against it, basically. Well, we've got questions from the audience. Let's turn to the crowd.
Hey, Simon.
Hey, mate.
How you doing? You mentioned earlier that you were brought up in the late 70s, early 80s. And other than surfing, I was reading that you also made a lot of movies using Super 8.
Yeah, that's exactly, that's where I started playing around. I took photographs sort of from a young age. I was obsessed with photography and had dark rooms for many years. And then I bought a Super 8 in a camera shop once when I think I was about 18, and then started shooting Super 8 and kept shooting Super 8. And different friends over the years bought me more Super 8 cameras, and I used to travel with them all the time, and then when I moved to California in my sort of mid-20s, I could get it processed at a place in Burbank, Super 8 sound, so it was a lot easier, and I would project it at home, put a sheet on the wall and put on a CD or, a tape and play music, and I would splice and cut things together, and that was a great foundation for me, because it was about, technically you're exposing, you're framing, you're pulling focus all at once, and then when you're cutting it, you're playing around, and it's so difficult to cut Super 8 film. I bought a video camera at one point, and I used to project it and shoot it on a video camera, and then get the video camera connected to the VHS and press pause, and I'd be up all night doing that, but I was obsessed with it. I just enjoy that process. So I had that foundation from pretty young, and I've probably got 100 hours of Super 8 footage of not just friends and family, but I used to take it to film sets. A lot of the early films that I was on, I shot a lot of Super 8 footage. One day I'll kind of maybe archive it.
So the question I was going to ask as well, based on the background with you filming in Super 8, did you get into acting by design, or did you always want to be behind the camera based on the work that you did with making your own movies when you were younger?
I think when the closest cinema to where I lived was a 40-minute drive away. And if you can convince someone's mum to drive us to the movies, that would be great. Or we hitchhiked or something to get up there. And there was only one cinema, and you saw whatever was on. It was not about like, well, what are we going to see? It's like, we're going to the movies. We didn't even know what was on until we got there. And then you just bought a ticket and you went in and watched the film. But I remember sitting in and watching films, and the experience that I had in the cinema in the dark, where I could go into a character's mind and story and put myself in there, that I'm getting goosebumps now just talking about it. That feeling was an incredible catharsis for me. Like it was an escape. I could ask myself questions. It didn't matter, even if it was a female lead. I could still put myself into that character's shoes. That I guess maybe I'm wired that way. But in those moments, I thought I'd love to be an actor because I love the way that they're able to communicate with you through a screen and not necessarily through dialogue, but just through circumstances and situations, through moments. And that was powerful to me because I was not very articulate. I was quite dyslexic when I was young and I couldn't read very well. So it took me a long time to get into reading. But I'd see the movies and people would communicate and I could learn to understand myself through those experiences. That was why I wanted to become an actor. And I kind of still just fell into it because I think a lot of people go to the movies and go, I want to be an actor. I want to be that guy. I sometimes said, I want to be that girl. But, and then as soon as I was on set, I was sort of dazzled by how things work. And I like to know how things work. And I've always been curious about how the process of filmmaking, and that triggered that. And from that point, I was like, I'm going to go back there at some point. But for now, I've got to feed my kids and put a roof over my head, and I'm doing it in front of the camera. So I'll just,
Super 8 only gets you so far. Right?
Yeah, make hay while the sun shines, yeah.
Great. Do we have another question? Great. Right over here.
I saw Blue Night at Tribeca last month, and how was your experience working in that movie, and did you learn something from that director?
Yeah, that was the first acting gig I'd done after I'd finished this film, because this was sort of pretty much 2 and 3 years of work from pre-production to post and finishing it, or actually till now, releasing it. So that was the first job I took with a first-time feature film, narrative feature film director. Fabian had made a documentary before. So I was incredibly polite and understanding, far more than I ever have been before with any other director, I must admit. I think making the film sort of chastened me a little. It was nice because, as an actor, when you're working, it was a different experience for me as an actor than I'd ever had before because I knew I was just coming in and going. I was just a tourist. So I lob in, I contribute what I can, enjoy the experience, and then leave you with it, folks. Whereas with this, it was like working with non-actors. The way I shot it was a lot different. A lot looser. There was no marks. I rolled camera all the time. I continued to roll camera. I encouraged improvisation. I would sort of rolling pickups and stuff. So I had a lot of footage to sift through, and it was a big responsibility in post-production. It was nice to just walk in and for 2 days, lovely people, do my job and leave.
Great. One more question?
Hi. What is next for you? Are you working already on some new project?
Well, the process of releasing the film is work in itself. Although it's kind of good, it's fun work because it's like you're letting go. But I have another book that I've optioned and I'm in the process of adapting it. And I'll maybe try and get that up. Yeah, to direct it. Yeah. Yeah, I like directing. It's kind of takes up, it's sort of perfect for me because I'm incredibly focused, but also like I talk in circles and I jump around a lot, as you probably noticed in this interview. But when you're a director, you're asked about 500 questions a day. So just when you're getting bored with being asked about props, someone comes over and says, "What do you think about this?" So you're jumping around. It's perfect if you've got a short attention span. And I like being in control, like of the tone and the aesthetic, and I like to I don't know, I like to work with people. I like working with different types of artistic and the craft as well, like technicians. So that's a joy for me.
Bossing everyone around is a lot of fun.
Yeah, but you know, without it feeling like they're being bossed around.
Right, exactly.
hopefully.
Being diplomatic at the same time. Great. Well, thanks so much for Simon Baker joining us today. Breath is in theaters in New York on June 1st and opens wide on June 8th. Thanks again. And
thank you.
Best of luck with the movie.
And thank you.